Good evening and welcome everyone. My name is Nicole Imgrand and I'm the owner and director of River's Edge Counseling Center. And I'm here this evening with Ashlyn Demers, who is going to offer us a presentation on values, exploration, and meaning making. The webinar tonight is part of our Wellness Matters series. Our amazing team at River's Edge has produced, I think, almost 60 of these webinars now in the last couple of years. And if you go to the blog page on our website, you are welcome to watch any of them anytime. Our series for this spring is almost wrapping up. We do have one more, and that will be Setting Boundaries and Regaining Control on June 14th. And shortly after, by about mid-July or so, if you look at the event page on our website, we will publish the schedule for fall. And we usually offer a couple of them each month, and you are always welcome to join us. Ashlyn, our presenter this evening, is a practicum student at River's Edge Counseling Center. She went to MacEwan University for her BA in psychology, and she recently graduated from the University of Lethbridge with her Master of Education in Counseling Psychology. Prior to pursuing her career in counseling, Ashlyn spent time during her undergraduate degree working in student services and volunteering in not-for-profit frontline mental health services. These experiences helped her to discover and confirm her true passion for working with people in a therapeutic capacity. Now that she's finished with her degree, she's excited to begin the process of becoming a registered provisional psychologist in the summer following her practicum. Since starting as a student in September, Ashlyn's work at River's Edge has been primarily with teen and adult individuals working on a variety of different issues. She's also had the opportunity to facilitate two groups during her practicum. It was a grief group and then a teen wellness group. She's genuinely enjoyed the opportunity to connect and work with clients from all walks of life. Ashlyn's approach to therapy is trauma-informed and person-centered, which emphasizes the development of a strong therapeutic relationship built on empathy, trust, and compassion. To help facilitate this relationship, she draws on her ability to connect through being her own authentic self, which includes bringing patience and an open, non-judgmental attitude, and when appropriate, also some humor to her work. To best meet the needs of each client, Ashlyn integrates aspects of different therapies, including narrative therapy, CBT, mindfulness, and self-compassion. She values any opportunity to learn about different approaches and techniques that will help her in her work with clients. And most recently, I know that Ashlyn has also done some training in EMDR to help clients process trauma. It's been wonderful having Ashlyn with us this year and seeing her growth, and I'm really excited you're doing this presentation for us tonight, Ashlyn. So Ashlyn's told me her presentation isn't going to take the full hour, maybe 40 or 45 minutes, which will leave us some time for discussion and questions. You can use the chat function here in Zoom, also the Q&A function. I'll keep my eye on them while she's presenting, just to make sure there's no technical difficulties or anything. And then at the end, we can read through some of the comments in the chat and ask Ashlyn some questions as well. So with that, I am going to turn it over to you.
Thanks for the introduction, Nicole, and thank you to everybody who's signed up to listen to me talk this evening. So I'll just kind of jump right into it here. See if I can share my screen successfully again. Okay. Should be able to see the title of this talk. It's pretty interesting being in the presenter role for one of these things. It really does kind of feel like I'm talking to myself, but I will trust that there are people on the other side. So I'll just jump right in here into our topic about tonight, which you'll likely already know is about values, exploration, and meaning making. So for tonight, we'll kind of start with giving us a bit of a foundation. And to do that, I'll talk a little bit about a therapy that does a lot of work with values, and that's ACT. And then from there, I'll touch on meaning making and how it relates to the next piece on our agenda, which is values. And then I'll kind of walk us through a few different practical exercises that can come in handy when starting to consider what our values might be. And you're free to follow along with any or all of these exercises, but there's also the opportunity to come back to the recording of this talk, which I think is added at some point, if you want to kind of go at your own pace through some of these exercises. Some of them can take a little bit more time than we maybe have here tonight, so don't feel pressured to keep up if that's what you're trying to do. Then from there, we'll have some time for questions, which I'll try my best to answer, and any comments that you might have. Okay, so to start with this theoretical lens here, we have ACT. So I'll be drawing from this to kind of unpack what values are and the role they play in a meaningful life. So ACT stands for Acceptance and Commitment Therapy. This certainly isn't the only approach to understanding values, but it's what we'll use to create a bit of that foundation for tonight's content. And so before we get into how ACT approaches values, I'll give a little bit of insight into what it is. So acceptance and commitment therapy is a type of psychotherapy originated by Stephen Hayes, and it really just aims to enhance your psychological flexibility and ability to adjust to the things happening in your world and kind of internally. And so there are two main counterparts of ACT. So essential that they're kind of in the name. So there's acceptance and there's commitment, which are on the screen here, one of the values there. Yeah, they show up in the 6 main principles I have here on the slide. So when we use ACT to talk about this first piece of acceptance, we're talking about the acceptance of, the tough things in life, the miseries, the failures, any ailments, the things that can maybe make life hard. When we're referring to commitment, we're talking about the commitment to kind of change for the better and following the right chain of actions to make that happen. So most simply put, ACT encourages people to accept difficulties and move on. Sometimes easier said than done, and that's where lots of the work comes in, instead of getting stuck and ruminating on them. And in doing this, ideally, we're able to leave negativity behind whenever possible and use that energy instead towards more positive thoughts and actions that are in line with the life we want to live and the people we would like to be. And so kind of the main goal, if we were to wrap it up into one sentence here for ACT, is to optimize our inner potential. And we do that by overcoming the painful thoughts and emotions and look for kind of insight into what's personally meaningful for us. So I'll just quickly kind of go through these 6 principles here a little bit more. So we have acceptance, which we kind of already touched on here, which is just full recognition and awareness of our feelings without trying to change them. And then we have cognitive diffusion, which is essentially changing the way we feel about our thoughts rather than trying to change our thoughts themselves. And then next we have mindfulness, which comes up in a lot of therapies actually, and that's just being present in the now, kind of making, which allows, making, thoughts and actions more consistent and aligned with how we want to be in the present. And then ACT also spends some time focusing on the self, either as a context, concept, and process. So when we are talking about the self as context, we're talking about how we are in relation to others and the world around us. When we're talking about ourself as a concept, we're talking about deep-rooted beliefs, like who am I, what am I thinking, what do I feel? It's kind of the most relevant to meaning making, I think. And then we're also talking about the self as a process. So that's time frame and ideas about the past, present, and future. And then in bold here, our 5th principle that we'll touch on in the main kind of part of our talk is values. And it's a pretty crucial component to ACT. It spends a lot of time looking at how to identify and then live the values that bring the most meaning and guide an individual's choices. So it kind of gives us direction, as we'll see later in the talk. And then finally, we have committed action. So that's essentially just walking the talk. So There's a component of learning in this therapy and this approach. And then there's also the actual part where we're practicing and working towards our goals. So we're doing the learning and then we're going out and trying to apply it for the better. So each of these 5 processes, acceptance, cognitive diffusion, mindfulness, self, committed actions, all really play a role in that 6th process of values, which we'll talk about. And then before we jump into kind of the main portion of this talk on values, I want to address the other big chunk of this talk, which is meaning making. And so hopefully in just a minute, it'll kind of make more sense as to why meaning making is so important to touch on when we're exploring our values. But to start, we'll kind of give ourselves a bit of a definition to work with. And so we have one right on the slide here, and it's just the process by which people interpret situations, events, objects, or discourses in light of their previous knowledge and experiences. So we're taking information in, we're interpreting it, and we are applying it, kind of moving forward. It's almost like the learning that's done along the way. Slide here. And I wanted to break it down a little bit more between 2 different types of meaning. So we have global meaning and we have situational meaning. Global meaning is our beliefs, our goals, our subjective feelings. It really informs how an individual sees themselves and where they feel like they fit in the world. It also informs how they interpret things around them. Global meaning is constructed early in life, and it can change over time based on your own personal experiences. And then aside from that, we also have situational meaning, which is meaning in any given context of an experience. It's often during stressful situations that situational meaning will come up. And the key here is that when our global meaning doesn't match up with the situational meaning, we can experience some distress, which can lead to meaning making or a change in our global meaning. So this might show as a change in beliefs, goals, feelings, or values. So to kind of sum it up, our situational meaning that we make in a given situation, like it's in the title, can very much influence our overall global meaning that we hold. Simply put, meaning making is how we make sense of the world. We're making meaning about the world around us all the time, whether we're consciously aware of it or not. And it's also important to really keep in mind that what one person might find meaningful might seem useless or irrelevant to another person. It's not necessarily as simple as finding one overall cause of meaning or influence in meaning that applies to everybody. It's a very individual experience. And even though it is an individual experience, humans in general all really have that desire for meaning and happiness in our lives. So it's common across everybody. There are some important functions of meaning making. Viktor Frankl, a Holocaust survivor and the author of Man's Search for Meaning, shares a few of them throughout his book. So we have some functions here on the screen. It can create purpose. Meaning making influences our judgment and our actions, provides us with a sense of control and self-worth. And it can also increase coping and positive adjustment to difficult situations, adversity, negative events. It's actually been found to be associated with better adjustment among cancer survivors, just by kind of deriving positive meanings from their cancer experiences. And then it wouldn't be a presentation in 2022 if I didn't mention COVID at least once. And the latest research on that kind of showed that during the outbreak of COVID-19, people who perceived less negative impacts of the pandemic actually reported lower levels of psychological distress. So it didn't change the fact that the pandemic was happening and things were hard, but their perspective and their ability to pull meaning from kind of a tough situation made all the difference there. So keeping all of this in mind, it makes sense that in times when we lose sight of our own meaning, which can be easy sometimes, distress can kind of follow. We can really kind of feel off. And I also wanted to touch on meaning and suffering. So meaning making can be particularly important during times of suffering, which is something that is unfortunately inevitable in everybody's life. No matter what, there's always suffering. Viktor Frankl also wrote about this topic just based on his experience of living through the Holocaust in a concentration camp. He found that those who were able to stay connected to a greater purpose or their meaning and draw meaning from kind of the endless suffering were more likely to survive the life-threatening conditions. And so Viktor Frankl refers several times to the words of Nietzsche and his quote of, "He who has a why to live for can bear almost any how." So we can kind of look at values as providing the why. He also shared that meaning can be discovered under all circumstances, even in the most miserable of experiences, wherever there's loss and tragedy. But meaning doesn't have to come from suffering. It can come from a bunch of other things. It can come from, for example, specifically, he mentioned that it can come from doing things for people, kind of altruism, and just experiencing value as well. So, kind of tie in mentioning meaning to the portion around values. Personal values are the measuring sticks by which we determine what is a successful and meaningful life. So values are like the lens through which we kind of view the world, or maybe the compass that dictates the direction that we want to go in. And so, getting ahead of myself. Kind of a common problem that was shared with me in my first course I ever took in my master's. My professor was talking about how we often spend more time thinking about our day or our plans for dinner, our plans for the weekend, which are important to think about. But we spend more time thinking about things like that than we do thinking about our values. Like I can't speak for everyone, but this definitely rang true to me. In the business of life, it can be really easy to lose touch with those things, the values, especially when they might be running so subtly in the background. But considering they're kind of dictating the directions that we take and the decisions that we make, I think there may be some value in spending some time either getting acquainted for the first time or reacquainted with your values. Now that I've said the word values a million times, maybe I'll share a bit of a definition for us. And I think my slides are longer, so I'll go here. Here is our definition that we're going to work with. So a value, this one comes from Ruth Harris, which is a huge kind of contributor to ACT. And he defines it as our heart's deepest desires, how we want to be, what we want to stand for, how we want the world to relate to us, and how we want to relate to the world. So kind of the leading principles that can guide us and motivate us as we move through life. So pretty important. Really kind of hit that home. I'm going to show this video that I skipped. Fingers crossed that it works.
Values is a somewhat confusing word because there's a few different definitions of it floating around. What I mean by values is your heart's deepest desires for how you want to behave as a human being, what you want to stand for in life, how you want to treat yourself, others, and the world around you. Values are important because they give our lives color and richness and fulfillment. And they act as an inner compass that guides us and gives us direction in life, wherever we go, whatever we're doing. And they give us a sense of meaning and purpose.
Okay, so just a really quick video, kind of going into a tiny bit more detail about what was already on the screen. So here is a bit of a description of where these values even come from. So they can come from and be influenced by different individual experiences, our community can influence them, the leaders around us, religion and culture, our family and friends, which we do spend a lot of time kind of with. So all of these things together can help to influence and form the values that we hold. To share a few benefits of clarifying your values, reasons to even do this work. Aside from kind of the massive benefit of meaning making, clarifying our values has been shown to decrease emotional distress and increase positive behaviors. Identifying your values and really clarifying them can lead to a stronger sense of purpose, self and self-understanding, which can lead to an increase in daily functioning and decision making. I read somewhere that your values are essentially like your inner magic 8-ball. They kind of just help to answer the really difficult questions and maybe make those more difficult decisions for us. A little bit more complicated than the magic 8-ball, but similar idea. And then they can also be just really grounding and motivating. So overall, knowing what your own core values are can really just help to live more authentically and confidently. So if we are consciously aware of our values, which we aren't always before we start this work, it's more likely that we're going to experience a greater level of value congruence. So this is the extent to which an individual's behavior is consistent with their value. So Brene Brown, who talks a lot about values in her work, and we'll touch on her actually in one of our exercises later, would call this living into your values. So just really living consistently with your values. It shows up in the way you are with people or in the world. And this kind of value congruence can lead us to all those perks that we kind of went through before, the benefits of knowing our values. So if we have value congruence, we also have the opposite of value incongruence. So that's just being disconnected from our values. And so this is the experience of being disconnected, which can really decrease our sense of meaning. And when we aren't living in accordance to our values, when we're kind of in this place of value incongruence, it's really common to feel off, unsatisfied, or just kind of discontent. And you might not even 100% know why. And so sometimes values incongruence can show with our urges that we have, depending on what they are. So sometimes we have urges to act in ways that aren't necessarily congruent with our values. So for example, someone might really truly value patience, but also have the urge to get angry or yell at the person who made their coffee wrong because they were having a really tough morning or whatever the reason is. So their value is patience, but they have this urge to really kind of lash out at a person for maybe doing something wrong. So in that moment, their values aren't necessarily in line with their urges or their potential behavior. But it can be really difficult in the moment to tell if an urge is in line with our values. And so to help kind of figure this out, you might reflect on a few questions that Russ Harris poses. Heads up, these are the first of many reflection questions that I'll kind of throw out tonight. So the first is, if I act on this urge, will I be acting like the person I want to be? And will it help take my life in the direction that I want to go? So if the answer is yes to either of these, then there's a strong chance that you'll be making decisions and acting in line with your values, therefore kind of just being more congruent with your values. But it'd be really hard to answer these questions if you haven't already done a little bit of digging into identifying what your values even are. So in that case, you can maybe have that off feeling, but just have no idea as to why that might be. We have a couple more things to keep in mind with our values here. One big one is that values do not equal goals. They're not the same thing. It can be very easy to mix up a value for a goal, though. So oftentimes when you sit and you talk to a person about their values for the first time, it's really common for them to actually share a goal with you instead. And both can be similar, both can be motivating and influence the decisions that we make, but there are some differences. So a goal is a desired outcome that can be achieved or completed, kind of crossed off the list. So for example, someone can have a goal maybe to read 50 books in a year. I don't know if that's a lot or a little, depends on the person, I guess, but their goal is to read 50 books. And to them, maybe that's a lot. So similar to a value, this goal might kind of influence how they spend their free time or their resources. But once they read that 50th book, they've reached their goal. They can choose to never read another book again, and that goal would still have been accomplished. They could still tell people they did that. If we look at a potential value that the person with the goal to read 50 books is, it might be that they have a value for education or curiosity. Maybe they're competing with another person to read all of these books. In that case, maybe one of their values is competition. But if any of these are values, it's an ongoing process. They don't have an end point like a goal. There's nothing to cross off a list. And so if they stop being curious or competitive or, interested in education, then they're no longer living into that value and it's just not a value for them anymore. Another good metaphor and a little bit briefer is a value is like heading west. No matter how far you travel, there's always farther west you can go. There's no end point. Whereas a goal is like a mountain or a river that you really hope to cross on your journey west. And once you've gone over it, it's done. You have achieved that goal. I even have a thought for it. So if your goals line up with your values, you're more likely to feel a stronger sense of meaning. They're definitely related. They're just two different things. A video here.
Society tells us the way to be happy is to achieve our goals. Get that great job, earn that money, get a good body, find a partner, have happy, healthy kids, have a big house, have a nice car, have holidays. Goal, 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 goal. And it's true that if you do actually manage to achieve these goals, then there is a little moment of joy and happiness. But how long does it last? How long before you're looking at the next goal, and then the next goal, and then the next goal? And as we live our life trying to constantly strive to achieve these goals, one after the other, how tiring and exhausting does it get? Is this you? There is a radically different way to live your life, which is a life based on values, a values-focused life. It's like two kids in the back of a car, and it's a 3-hour car journey to Disneyland. And the first kid is totally goal-focused. Are we there yet? Are we there yet? How much longer? Are we there yet? This journey of frustration, it's all about the goal. The second kid is values-focused. He's got the same goal. He wants to get to Disneyland, but he's also in touch with his values around curiosity, adventure, having fun. So he's looking out of the window, playing I Spy with My Little Eye. He's counting all the, the interesting farmhouses that he sees on the way. He's spotting interesting farm animals, cows and sheep. He's noticing different types of trucks and cars on the freeway. So he's actually appreciating the journey as he heads towards his goal. Now, they both reach Disneyland at the same time. They both have a fantastic time at Disneyland because they both got to achieve the goal. But the first kid had a journey of frustration. The second kid had a fulfilling, rewarding journey. Then on the way home, the first kid, are we home yet? Are we home yet? Are we home yet? All about the goal, all that frustration. Second kid's looking out of the window, noticing how the world looks different at night, spotting the lights in the farmhouses and the cat's eyes on the freeway. The car breaks down on the way to Disneyland. Now, both kids are really disappointed because neither of them achieved their goal. But the second kid at least had a fulfilling journey up until that point. Now, when the pickup truck arrives to tow them home, the first kid, oh, it's not fair. I want to go to Disneyland. How long before the car gets repaired? It's not fair. It's not fair. The second kid starts to notice how the world looks different when you're sitting in the front of a pickup truck high above the level of the rest of the traffic. So this is the very important distinction between the values-focused life and the goal-focused life. In the values-focused life, we have the fulfillment and satisfaction of living our values every step of the way towards our goals, the satisfaction of achieving our goals, and the fulfillment that comes of living our values even when we don't achieve our goals.
I don't know if it got really loud there at the end for everybody. So if it did, I apologize. I don't know why that happened. That is the gist, values versus goals. And then the next thing I'll point out, just to kind of keep in mind, is that values do change. And that's pretty natural. So if you think back to when you were younger, maybe you were a little kid or a teenager, and just imagining how different your values might have looked then compared to now. And knowing that that's totally normal. Up here, just a big list of values. And I know that the writing's probably very small here, but this link doesn't work. So if you ever want to look at your own list of values, and maybe that's something that you can pull up if you ever really want to do some of the exercises that we'll go through shortly. It's just a great starting point to kind of brainstorm what your values might be. It can be hard to kind of imagine or come up with it just from scratch, and you don't even necessarily always know that there are values for certain things, or at least I didn't. So there's accountability, ambition, confidence, friendship. There's a value for everything. So I think the fun part is determining what yours are. So if we kind of go back to the metaphor of traveling, living without a clear understanding of our values is a little bit like going on a trip without having any clue or reason for what direction you're heading in. And for some people, maybe that's perfect. Maybe a value of theirs includes spontaneity. But in exploring what your values are, you're basically mapping out what direction you want to take based on how meaningful it would be for you. So maybe being a little more intentional with the way you live. And it might not be hard to take a look at a list like this one and identify values that really seem to fit, or at least seem like you'd like them to. Maybe they look nice or they sound like they'd be good. But it can sometimes be intimidating to look at our whole life, who we are, who we'd like to be, what matters to us, and how we spend our time. And values that seem objectively good or sound like they'd be really great to have aren't necessarily the ones that create kind of that deep level of meaning. So I encourage you to really be honest with yourself in terms of like what creates that meaning for you. And so this all really goes to say that it can take time and work to begin identifying our true guiding values. And there are lots of ways that we can do this. So with the rest of our time together, I'll just kind of walk you through a few ways that we might begin to do this work. Keep in mind that it can sometimes take more than one activity or exercise to really land on your values. So I encourage you to just really be patient with yourself throughout that process. And there's meaning in the work itself. And like I said, this will eventually be on the River's Edge website if you ever want to go back and kind of pause along the way. So you're absolutely free to do that. So first, we'll start with some more reflection questions. Here are just a few. This is definitely not an exhaustive list, but it's a good starting point. We have, who do you care about? And who do you like to hang out with? What matters to you? What gets you fired up? What inspires you, or maybe what infuriates you? What makes you sad, happy, angry, scared? So lots of like tough emotions. Maybe excited could be a good one too. Oh, I double dipped there. What do you enjoy? What floats your boat is one way someone's put it. When do you really feel grateful or appreciative, and for what? And when do you feel like you're living life your way? And what are you doing when you feel that way? So these can sometimes make really great journal questions if that's something that you like to do, just to kind of really give yourself time and just space to reflect on that. But it's also something that you can just kind of think of in passing if you'd like. And here's a quick little exercise that uses your imagination a bit to clarify values. So imagine that you're near the end of a really long life and you're looking back on your life as it is today, and kind of finish these questions or these sentences. Looking back, I spent too much time worrying about blank. I spent too little time doing things such as, and if I could go back in time, I would blank. We have this exercise from Brene Brown, and she actually has a podcast episode that I have at the end of this presentation where she really walks you through this exercise, and she actually does it alongside the episode, so you can really see it in action with her doing it. But I'll just do a little overview of what that looks like. So start with that list of values that we kind of pulled up earlier, or you can find your own list. There's tons online. And you start by circling 10 to 15 of the ones that you feel like you hold. And this can be a bit of maybe the easy part, just going through and circling what speaks to you. Then from there, kind of comes debatably the hard part, at least for me, where you're going to take that 10 to 15 that you've identified and really narrow it down to 2. Depending on how many you circle to start with, that can take a little bit of work. You're going to kind of consider which 1 or 2 values are kind of the foundation for the rest of the values you circled. So what are the 1 or 2 values where everything else is forged? It's not to say that the other 13 values that you circled aren't important. They just might fall under these main 1 or 2. So once you do that, there are some questions that Brene shares to consider. One is, what are 3 behaviors that support your value? So what are you doing in the world, in your life, around others, even by yourself, that really supports the value? And then the next question is, what are 3 slippery behaviors that are outside of your value? So the things that you do that maybe create a little bit of value incongruence. And they can cause that off feeling. And sometimes we're not even aware of it until we sit down and really reflect on it. And then another question is, what is an example of a time when you were fully living into this value? And how did you feel? What was that experience like? And this can really help to kind of seek out more of those experiences and even just appreciate that experience in itself. Then there's more questions that she leaves you with, just to kind of go even deeper if you're interested. So the first one is, who is someone who knows your values and supports your effort to live into them? And what does support from this person look like? So getting other people involved where possible. The next one is, what can you do as an act of self-compassion to support yourself in the hard work of living into your values? So all of this can be easier said than done sometimes. So what can you do to just really give yourself space to stumble, maybe mess up, make mistakes, knowing that all of it is part of the process? And then what are early warning indicators or signs that you're living outside of your values? So if we know what those look like, we know what to look out for. And sometimes we can prevent even slipping outside of the values, or at least shorten the amount of time that we spend outside of them. Lots of spelling errors. I'm sorry, everybody. So what does it feel like when you're living into your values? And how can you check yourself? How can you hold yourself accountable? Maybe that's getting other people involved. Maybe that's just some internal reflection. What does it look like to check yourself throughout this process? There's actually a worksheet that you can find, and I tried to link it at the end of this presentation, but I'm not 100% sure if it worked. But if you actually just Google what I have written out as the link, the worksheet itself does pop up if you like a little bit of structure there. And then the last quick activity we have here is the Clarifying Your Values activity, and that's from Russ Harris. It's included in his book, The Happiness Trap, which I also have at the end of this presentation here. And so this activity has us really look into different areas of our lives to begin clarifying those values. So we might look at family, intimate relationships, friendships, employment, education, personal development, recreation, fun, and leisure. All things where our values can kind of show up and let us know what's going on. But Russ Harris breaks it down into 4 to kind of keep things manageable. And so if you want to replace any of these 4 domains with a different one, you're more than welcome to do that. I encourage you to pick whichever one feels really relevant to you. But for this case, we have work or education, relationships, personal growth and health, and leisure. So he breaks it up into 4 domains here. So work and education can refer to workplace, career, school, knowledge, education, skills development. This might even include volunteering or other forms of unpaid work. And some questions here he specifically asks for this domain is, how do you want to be towards your clients, customers, colleagues, employees, fellow workers, classmates? What qualities do you want to bring to your work, and what skills do you want to develop? And then he has similar questions there for the relationship aspect. And relationships here refers to any kind of intimate relationships, intimacy, closeness, friendship, how you want to be able to bond with people in your life. It can include your partner, children, parents, relatives, friends, coworkers, any social contacts that you might have. Then we have personal growth and health, which just refers to your development as a human. This can include religion, personal expression of spirituality, creativity, life skills, meditation, getting into nature, exercise, anything where you're feeling personally just like fed in a way and health focused. And then we also have leisure. So how you play, relax, just enjoy yourself. And that can include your hobbies, any activities that you do for rest, recreation, fun and activity, creativity. So take each of these domains and make a list of any of the values that you hold under each domain. And so you might want to use that list of values that we touched on previously. You might even find that the values repeat in different domains, but they can also be different. So once you have this list, you can draw this bullseye here read through your values, and then mark down an X on the dartboard to represent where you stand today in each domain. So an X in the bullseye right in the middle here means that you are fully living into your values in that area of your life. And the further that you get away from the bullseye is further away you are from living those values in your life. And so you can just keep in mind that these X's have the ability to move. So if you notice that, for example, maybe you're not living into your values in the work or education domain, you can kind of reflect on that and make the adjustments that you feel like are necessary. And it also gives you the opportunity to really just acknowledge the fact that there are probably some areas where you are living into your values. It doesn't have to be an all or nothing thing. Just because maybe, for example, you aren't fully living into your values in one domain doesn't mean that you aren't in all of them. There's lots of room for flexibility here. A quick review after our final little exercise there. Meaning and our ability to make meaning is really important for our well-being, kind of as a broad statement there. What's meaningful to one might not be meaningful to another, and it can really be derived from anything. Values help us do that, and it can really take a lot of self-reflection to determine what our core values really are, but it is a process that can sometimes be fun or enjoyable if we kind of think into it and embrace it. These are just different resources and sources that I touched on a little bit, and I don't think the links work from here, but they might work on the website. But even if you type in these things, they typically pop up on Google. So I think that is all that I have. Yeah. Maybe I'll stop sharing screen here. And we'll come back to you all.
Hello, that was wonderful. Thank you very much, Ashlyn. That was wonderful. And so just checking if we have any questions or comments. For those of you who need to leave and not able to stay for a couple of minutes of conversation, I just want to thank you for coming tonight and remind you that you are always welcome to join us for our talks. Have a good night.